Welcome to LeRaglai Jewish Ministries, where we teach the Bible from a Jewish historical, cultural, and linguistic perspective. This is part 2 in our Birth of the Messiah teaching series, and I've titled this teaching, Why Bethlehem? Now, everyone is familiar with the nativity scene of Yeshua in the manger with Mary and Joseph standing nearby with the star overhead shining bright over Bethlehem. If the question were asked to people around the world, in what city was Jesus born? 99% of people would respond, Bethlehem. It is common knowledge that Yeshua was born in Bethlehem. But why? Why was the Messiah born in this particular city? In this teaching, we will review the obvious reasons for why Bethlehem was chosen as the birthplace for the Messiah, but we will also seek to discover the core biblical reasons for why this particular ancient city was chosen. What are the biblical roots and origins of the city of Bethlehem? Hopefully, we'll discover this as we go through this study. First of all, in the Gospel of Matthew, we read one reason for why the Messiah was born in the city of Bethlehem. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, we read, Now after Yeshua was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea. For this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. For out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. That's Matthew 2, 1-6, right? Now the Messiah was born in Bethlehem because he had to fulfill the prophecy from Micah 5:2. In that last section of Matthew 2, verse 6 there, highlighted in blue, is the prophecy from Micah 5:2. Now the full prophecy from Micah 5:2 reads in this way, quote, But as for you, Bethlehem Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. So there's a couple things in the full reading of the verse from Micah 5:2. Number one, we see this double name for the city of Bethlehem, right? Bethlehem Ephratah. We'll talk more about this later. But we also see this added part that wasn't quoted in Matthew 2, the end of Micah 5:2 there, where it says, His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity, right? So not only was the Messiah to be born in Bethlehem, but his origins are from eternity. This is speaking of his deity, right? He's not only the Son of Man, he is the Son of God. Now, the first reason for Bethlehem being the birthplace of the Messiah is that prophecy had to be fulfilled, right? So we see how prophecy was fulfilled through the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. So what are the other reasons for why the Messiah was born in Bethlehem? In the Gospel of Luke, we read of a political reason for why the Messiah was born in Bethlehem. We read this in Luke 2, verses 1-7. Now, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census to be taken of all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was with child. While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Okay, so in Luke chapter 2, we read of the second reason, which is politics, right? A Roman decree to register for a census was given. Therefore, Joseph took Mary with him to Bethlehem to register there. And as a result, the Messiah was born in Bethlehem, right? So we have seen how both prophecy and politics brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem, where the Messiah was born. But why did God choose Bethlehem? What is the significance and importance of this particular location? We also know that Bethlehem is the city of the family of King David, as we read in 1 Samuel. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons," right? And we know that that son was King David. So Jesse is his father. Bethlehem is the city of King David. King David was born and raised in the city of Bethlehem. The Lord also declared through Nathan the prophet that David's house, kingdom, and throne would endure forever. As we read here in 2 Samuel 7:16, quote, "Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever," right? So the enduring kingdom of King David. So the Messiah was born in Bethlehem as a physical descendant of Mary and as the registered son of Joseph, both of whom were from the lineage of King David, as we read in Matthew chapter 1 and Luke 3, right? The two genealogies there. Now, as we see here, prophecy, a political decree, and the royal right to the eternal throne of King David are all biblically documented reasons for why the Messiah had to be born in Bethlehem. There is one more significant reason for why Bethlehem is the birthplace of the Messiah, and that is the very meaning of the name Bethlehem. What does the name Bethlehem mean? Most of us are familiar with the original Hebrew here. It's Bethlehem, which most generally is translated as house of bread. It's a common translation. And we also know that Yeshua said of himself in John 6:35 that I am the bread of life, right? And we see a spiritual fulfillment, a spiritual connection here, right? That Yeshua is the very essence of spiritual life. And if we partake of him, we have eternal life, just like bread physically sustains our life. Yeshua spiritually sustains our life. Now, there's actually more to the meaning of Bethlehem that we will discover in this teaching. So understanding it as the house of bread is a good start, but there's more to this that we want to understand. There's more than meets the eye. So what else do the scriptures tell us about this city called Bethlehem? Where do we read the name of the city of Bethlehem for the first time in the Bible? Hopefully everyone has it in your minds. If you said the book of Genesis, you would be correct. So we read Bethlehem for the first time in Genesis chapter 35, verses 16 to 20, right? And this is when Jacob, who had left his parents in the land of Canaan, had traveled north to find a wife. He married two sisters and their two servants. So he had four wives basically when he came back to the land. And this is what we read when he came back to Israel with his family, with his four wives and 11 kids. We read this. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was still some distance to go to Ephrat, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." It came about as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, that is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. So the first time Bethlehem appears in the scriptures is to mark the destination of Jacob and his family after they left Bethel, right? They were headed towards Bethlehem. Rachel died along the journey as they were heading towards Ephrat, Bethlehem, and she was buried there. So again, we're seeing this double name for this city, right? Ephrat, Bethlehem. We'll talk more about this. I asked the question, why is Bethlehem also called Ephrat or Ephrata? What do these names tell us? So we're going to be looking at these two names of the one city because they also are significant. They both tell us something particular about this city. So before we answer those questions, though, why did Jacob bury Rachel on the way to Ephrat, Bethlehem? Why did he bury her on the way to this particular location? Now, there are two things in life that we generally do not choose. One is the time and location of birth, and the other is the time and location of death. We usually leave these in the hands of God. Now, Jacob buried Rachel on the way to Ephrat, Bethlehem, because that is where she died, an untimely death while giving birth to Benjamin. Jacob, however, chose where he would be buried. So where did Jacob die and where was he buried? We're going to see the significance of all this in a minute. Now we know that Jacob went down to Egypt with his sons, right after Joseph was made the second to Pharaoh there. And Jacob, when he was old, made the following request from his sons after blessing them. He knew he was going to die, and he made the following request about his burial. So we read this in Genesis 49, 29 to 33. Quote, "Then he charged them and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite for a burial site. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Heth. When Jacob finished charging his sons, he drew his feet into his bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people." So Jacob died there in Egypt, but he was buried at his request in Hebron in the cave of Machpelah, right? The burial site of Abraham and Sarah, of Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob's wife Leah. So Jacob buried his wife Leah, Rachel's sister, in Hebron, in that cave. So what does all this have to do with the city of Bethlehem? Rachel was Jacob's first love and his preferential wife, right? His preferred wife. We continually read in the scriptures how Jacob loves Rachel more than Leah. If it was so important for Jacob to be buried in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron with his forefathers, and he also chose to bury Leah there, why did he not have Rachel brought to the tomb and have her buried there as well? It's much closer to bury Rachel in Hebron than to take Jacob from Egypt and bury him in Hebron. But he didn't do it. Why didn't he bury Rachel in the same place that he wanted to be buried? Now, before Jacob died, he reminded Joseph that he buried Rachel, who is both the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, that he buried her on the way to Bethlehem. So let's read this again in Genesis 48, when Jacob, before he died, he was talking to Joseph. And he says, "Now as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrat, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrat, that is Bethlehem." So again, why did Jacob choose to bury Rachel at a location on the way to Ephrat, Bethlehem? Jacob seems to emphasize this and to repeat it over and over about this particular place of burying Rachel on the way to Bethlehem, Ephrat. Besides the fact that it was the place where she died, I believe there is a deeper answer to this question, which is found in the meaning of the names Bethlehem and Ephrat. The names Bethlehem and Ephrat are two names for the same city, and they are communicating a similar meaning. We've already talked about Bethlehem, right? Bethlehem can literally mean the house of bread, but it also means, like the word Beit means simply house, but Lechem means bread, but can also be food, sustenance, provision. It's a more general word for food. It's not simply bread. So it's basically representing a place of abundance, a house of provision, right? So that's the meaning of Bethlehem in a broader way. We see this many times in the scriptures, by the way. Number two, Ephrat. In Hebrew, Ephrat or Ephrata. It's just the masculine and feminine forms of the word, and they're used interchangeably for this particular city, by the way. So Ephrat or Ephrata, we'll use the word Ephrat, means fruitful or a place of fruitfulness. And you can see the connection there of a place of food and a place of fruitfulness, right? They're both expressing a place where there is abundant food. So Bethlehem and Ephrat are synonyms to describe a land that is characterized as being fruitful and plentiful, a place of abundant provision. It appears from the text that Jacob was communicating something by burying Rachel in a place marked on the way to Ephrat, Bethlehem. What was Jacob communicating? What do we know about the life of Jacob? Is there anything particular that stands out in Jacob's life? Throughout his life, Jacob sought to obtain the blessing of fruitfulness from beginning to end. I want to give a brief kind of overview of Jacob's life that's connected to this. But number one, Jacob was chosen by God in the womb before he was even born. God spoke this word to Jacob's mother, Rebekah. Number two, as Jacob came into the world, he was grasping on to the heel of his twin brother. And this action marked his life, all of his days, right? Jacob was constantly striving for the blessing, striving to be that firstborn son. Jacob purchased the birthright of the firstborn from Esau for a bowl of lentils. Jacob stole the blessing of the firstborn from his brother by deceiving his father. Jacob was always striving for the blessing and fruitfulness. Jacob received the patriarchal blessing from the Lord as he made his journey north to find a wife, as we read in Genesis 28, 13 to 14, where we read this blessing, right? I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Right? This is the same blessing that God gave to Abraham, the blessing of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? It's that continual blessing. In you and in your descendants, in your seed, all the families of the earth will be blessed. God blessed Jacob with great riches as well while he served his father-in-law in Padan Aram for 20 years, as we read in the following statement at the end of Jacob's life, Genesis 30:43. Not at the end of Jacob's life, at the end of Jacob's time in the north in Padan Aram. Quote, so the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys, right? So God gave him that blessing of a fruitful life, of a prosperous life, of abundance. After Jacob returned to the land of promise, to the land of Canaan, right, from Padan Aram with his 4 wives and 11 sons, God blessed him again in Genesis 35:11 to 12. This is before Benjamin was born, right before. God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come forth from you. The land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you. God not only blessed Jacob in these verses, but God commanded him to be fruitful and multiply. Blessing and fruitfulness were part of God's mandate on the life of Jacob. We even see how Jacob continued to seek the blessing of a fruitful life at the end of his days through his son Joseph. And we read this in Genesis 48, verses 3 to 5. And it's a very interesting situation that Jacob makes a certain request, right? We read this. Then Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. He said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. And then Jacob says to Joseph, now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are mine. So Jacob reminded Joseph how God blessed him and commanded him to be fruitful and numerous. Jacob then claimed Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as his own. Now we know that this actually literally became part of the tribes of Israel, right? Ephraim and Manasseh literally replaced Reuben and Simeon as time went on. They actually became 2 tribes, 2 dominant tribes. Ephraim represented the northern tribe of Israel. Ephraim and Manasseh were Joseph's sons, Jacob's grandsons, but Jacob claimed them as his own. Why would Jacob claim his grandsons as his own sons? We have to remember that Jacob was continually seeking the fullness of blessing and fruitfulness in life. And it seems that he even sought this through his own grandsons, especially Ephraim, right? What does the name Ephraim mean? The Hebrew name Ephraim means I am doubly fruitful. I think even in choosing him, he was like wanting that blessing of double fruitfulness, right? Joseph explained the meaning of Ephraim when he first named his son in Genesis 41:52. He named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. And just to say, Ephraim and Ephrat are from the same Hebrew root, meaning fruitful. Toward the end of his days, Jacob continued to seek the blessing of fruitfulness in his life by taking his grandson Ephraim to himself and including him as being counted as one of his sons. Jacob continued to pursue the blessing of fruitfulness in his life even after burying Rachel on the way to Bethlehem. Again, we ask the question, why did Jacob bury Rachel on the way to Ephrat, Bethlehem? Ephrat, Bethlehem is a land of blessing and a place of fruitfulness. I believe Jacob buried Rachel at that place as a desire for continued blessing and fruitfulness in his life. It was with an expectation of what lay ahead. So why did Jacob bury Rachel on the way to Ephrat, Bethlehem, instead of Hebron, instead of the cave of his forefathers? Number one, that is where she died on the way to Bethlehem. Number two, Ephrat, Bethlehem represents a place of fruitfulness and a land of blessing. Jacob wanted more fruit, more blessing, more abundance in his life. And number three, I believe it was prophetic beyond Jacob's comprehension and connects to the Messiah. How was this a prophetic act, and how does it connect to the Messiah by burying his wife on the way to Bethlehem, Ephrat? In which territory and tribe is Bethlehem located? As you see here on the picture on the right, in the southern territory and tribe of Judah, right? Bethlehem is located just south of Jerusalem. Which of Jacob's 4 wives was Judah's mother? It's Leah. So prophetically, Rachel was buried in connection to her sister Leah's territory on the way to Bethlehem of Judah. Why is this significant? The following key events occurred in Bethlehem. Rachel was buried on the way to Bethlehem. It's the first thing we read in the scriptures about the city of Bethlehem. Number 2, Boaz redeemed Ruth in Bethlehem. Number 3, David was born in Bethlehem. Number 4, David was anointed king in Bethlehem. And number 5, Mary gave birth to Yeshua in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is uniquely the city of 4 mothers. Number 1, Leah through her son Judah. Number 2, Rachel through her death and burial. Number 3, Ruth through her marriage to Boaz and the birth of their son Oved, who is the grandfather of King David. And number 4, Mary through the birth of the Messiah. Bethlehem unites the tribes and mothers of Israel in a unique manner through death and life, culminating in the life of the Messiah. Bethlehem is a city of fruitfulness, of abundance, physically and prophetically. Jacob sought the blessing of a fruitful life all of his days, from the cradle to the grave. Rachel's death and burial on the way to Bethlehem tells us that there would be a future blessing in that place, a blessing that Jacob did not achieve, but was buried like a seed in the ground. The birth of the Messiah in Bethlehem is the ultimate fulfillment of the blessing of fruitfulness in that place, a spiritual fruitfulness. God promised to Jacob that in him all the families of the earth will be blessed. This is the same promise that God gave to Abraham. In you all the families of the earth will be blessed, as we read in Genesis 12:3 to Abraham, later in Genesis 28 to Jacob. Neither Abraham nor Jacob saw this blessing fulfilled in their lifetime. It is only in the Messiah that this promise is fulfilled and that all the families of the earth are blessed through the Messiah's life, death, and resurrection. The family of God, those who have faith in God through the Messiah, Jew and Gentile, are the ultimate fulfillment of the blessing of Bethlehem. Prophecy, a political decree, and the royal right to the eternal throne of King David are all valid reasons for why the Messiah was born in Bethlehem. These reasons, together with the ultimate spiritual blessing of Yeshua's life for all of mankind, is why the Messiah was born in Bethlehem. He is the ultimate spiritual fruit that came from that city. This is the conclusion to Why Bethlehem, to part 2 of our series on the birth of the Messiah. I hope that you've been enjoying this teaching, and if you are, I ask you to share it with others, and feel free to share it with others. And please give a donation of any amount to LeRaglai so that we can continue to make these teachings available to all. Thank you, and God bless you.